But when the time comes to judge, to understand a betrayal which will spread like flame across the web, which will end worlds, I ask you not to think of me. My name was not even writ on water, as your lost poet's soul said, but to think of old earth dying for no reason.
And welcome back to the Reign of Books podcast, the reader's entry into great narratives, where the written page reigns supreme. I'm John Keel, joining you from the War Room. My co-host is Josh Preston, joining you from the Hyrule Cube. This is episode number 9, and we are at the end. Everything is going to be wrapped up here in this episode for Hyperion, or maybe not wrapped up, because maybe we need to read the second book in order to kind of wrap up, because there were a lot of cliffhangers, Josh, and you know what? This one ended kind of like Leviathan, except it was, good.
It's a space saga, John. No, you're right. There was a lot of big setup pieces, and but I look at this as Star Wars, and that's not too much of a too far-fetched of a comparison, because this was pretty impressive with its world building, and so let's look at it as a space saga, and let's give it a little bit of a break. I am having a little bit of withdrawal already, but I don't know if I'll be able to make it through the podcast. I already missed my fellow travelers and their stories of planet hopping, all the space battles, the search for the Tree of Life or whatever they were going for, and the burning forest, and all of it. I do miss all of it. But before we get to that, and before we get to the end of Hyperion and see if it finished as strongly as it began, and if it held through in the third act, let's talk about the news. First up in the news, John, is a story in the UK Telegraph. Waterstones Books founder, a UK bookstore founder, says the ebook revolution will soon go into decline. The so-called ebook revolution will go into decline because, why? It's already happened here in America, and basically the sales don't support the fact that people think that the printed book is dead. In 2013, British consumers spent £300 million on 80 million ebooks, and that's compared to £2.2 billion on 323 million physical books. And in November, statistics released by the American Association of Publishers show that adult ebook sales were up 4.8% in 12 months. These were ebook sales, while hardcover book sales had risen 11.5%. So these are pretty interesting statistics. I would have never thought that printed books were still far outpacing the ebook, because the ebook, in fact, is what made me come back to reading literature and fiction. What about you, John?
Yeah, I think maybe everyone just still can't picture a book collection on one tiny little device, and with the speed at which devices are being upgraded and changing, I have to get a new device every couple of years if I want to be current, right? And that may not matter to some people. And then I have to download the whole book collection onto that again. But there's something about walking into a room and seeing physical books on shelves. And I don't think we're ready to get over that just yet. But I'm like you. I'm all about the ebooks. It really should be the way of the future. I'm a little confused by this.
I hear you, buddy. No, you're right. You just convinced me I might need to actually make a space for a bigger than one little bookshelf in my office. But I don't know. The technology has kind of surpassed those roadblocks. And you could be right. People might want to still have a physical book collection. For whatever reason, and technology might be a barrier. Next up, Amazon's literary journal Day One is seeking submissions. Day One is a weekly journal that was started in October 2013, so it's less than 6 months old, and it picks one unpublished piece of fiction, one published poem each week by a previously unpublished author. Actually, they can never have been published. So you can submit works to this one-day journal. It's a $1.50 subscription, so it's not free, but it's another avenue for up-and-coming writers. And so if you're interested, this is a new opportunity at Amazon, who again is trying to take over the book world. Are you unpublished, John? Are you gonna take a look at some manuscripts you've got buried? Because you're more of a writer than I am.
Absolutely, but I really don't have all those manuscripts like you're saying. I need to sit down and write something for myself, or write a large work. I would love to be involved with that.
Actually, 20,000 words or less, and you're in, John. That's all that you have to. That's your cap. That's your limit. So find an app that can tell you where you're at. Actually, I do have a couple of good word processing programs that are for writers. The third story, New York City hosts a Twitter poetry contest. This is kind of appropriate because Hyperion was flooded with literary allusions and writers as protagonists, and it's for poetic reliefs and comic reliefs. So the New York City host Twitter poetry contest basically is the rules: keep it clean and only to one tweet. Do this before April 8th to be considered for publication in the Metro New York, which is a poem in your pocket publication. It comes out on April 24th.
And our last story is covering audiobook revenues. Although you mentioned that the ebook seems to be on the decline, which I think it's really too early to make a big statement like that. Audiobooks seem to be on the rise. It looks like from the years 2008 to 2013, the audiobook that world, I guess, is estimated to have grown at about 12%, totaling up to $1.6 billion. And the article goes on to state that people are using what they said was kind of throwaway money to spend on a relatively cheap audiobook, and then I can listen to it at my leisure. I can listen to it while I'm at the gym, while I'm driving my car. This report came from IBIS World, and they predict that the number of audiobook publishers is going to continue to rise. I am a huge fan of audiobooks. Like I've said before, I use it to supplement my reading because I do spend a lot of time in my car going back and forth to work, and it helps me get through books not faster, but just at a regular pace. And I think it's a great tool, although I wouldn't say lean on it 100% because you still need to read. That exercises your brain. But I still get to think about things while I'm listening in the car. So I'm glad to see that it's growing. I love audiobooks. I have my subscription to an audiobook company, and I'm constantly listening.
Yeah, John, they say it's relatively cheap, but just like graphic novels and some other types of media, it's a little above my budget. I mean, everything is relative, but you still have to pay the actors, and you still have a lot of high production value to actually get good audiobooks out there. I told you that I went for open source, out of copyright public domain books, and I was going to LibriVox.com, and I was like looking up all these classics, and I was like, wow. And that's how I read, quote unquote, Moby Dick, which I joked that I was too intellectually lazy to actually read that because you called it the Mount Everest of fiction. That was pretty deep. So audiobooks, A+ for some books. I guess it just depends, right?
It does, and I want to throw in one last comment before we get moving on to Hyperion that I'm seeing now, and there's not a lot of it out there, but audiobook publishers are having new original books developed just for audiobook and audiobook only, not coming out in text format. And that's actually something I'd like us to explore here at some point, where you and I, we review a book that was made specifically for audiobook. Some of the ones I've read have been incredible.
I did not know that, and I have to say I'm getting deja vu because with the ebook pricing and the huge lawsuits and the big tech companies trying to figure out what will consumers pay, we'll have to hedge our bets. We'll have to make a bet. What's going to be the standard for audiobooks in pricing? So we'll find out. But that's a good segue to just actually start our book, John, because this book would have been great for audiobooks. It's a huge ensemble cast, and by the end of the book, I cared about all of these characters. Each one of them, yes, their whole character arc fell into place, and they each showed us the world 700 years in the future through their eyes. So the story is pretty much the human experience on not 150 different worlds, but it shows you what that life could look like. And I'm telling you, I'm having withdrawal already because Braun Lamia, she's like this tough chick from the future. You have Martin Salinas who sits here and proves that even if you have a stroke in outer space, you can come back from it, man. You can become rich and famous. It's like the Life of Hard Knocks story. And then you have all these other archetypes: the soldier, the priest, the reluctant leader, the consul. And then there's the father. Can't leave out the father because his story as ordinary as it was, showed, life in the stars is so many different things to so many different people. But I miss my fellow travelers, but this is one of those stories that rises above the rest, and it really nails it when it comes to describing the human condition, and it connects you even in the future when it's kind of an insane future, and the world, we find out, John, the world or the galaxy is not as it seems, and even with a lot of loose ends, and to be fair, just to say, hey, they should have tied it up, we can look at it as a Lord of the Rings. The journey still continues, and I'm excited to continue it. But this book actually shows the completion and the beginning of the war, the inevitable war that we knew was coming. So we can start with the fifth story, Bron Lamia, or we can talk about any spoilers, spoiler alerts.
Well, yeah, a couple of notes before we jump into Bron Lamia's story. First of all, I ribbed the book a little bit at the beginning of the show, right, by making fun of it having a cliffhanger, but that's really just joking. I have to say, this is one of the best books I have ever read, and there's only a few that I would consider one of the best. This is right up there. I've been blown away by this whole thing, and something else I've been impressed with, and I can go and cross this note out of my notebook here, is that even as you come to the end of the book and you're still hearing the story of Bron Lamia, and then you get to the console and you're right there at the end of the book, you're still learning new stuff about the galaxy and the universe. He's continuing to set the scene all the way till the end of the book. I haven't seen a book really that does that in a long time, and I can't really think of one that has. Kind of unique. Usually at this point, authors have finished establishing the scene, and it's all action or it's all just plot at this point. You're continuing to learn more about the environment. I was pretty impressed with that.
Yeah, I was doing a little bit of research. They call it a frame story. So I guess it's a literary device, and that shows you I'm not an English major, but the frame story is the little stories within the larger story. So we actually, I think that was actually the big success of this. It kind of showed the universe in different ways and kind of circled back around to different planets that had been briefly mentioned earlier on. So there's a lot of like whoa moments, because again, a minority of the human civilization, they travel a lot, and because they're in cryogenic sleep for such long periods, they essentially jump generations, and they jump periods of their own civilization, and they awake to new politics, new alliances, just new everything, new technologies. So it's pretty interesting that time. I didn't get vertigo at the end here because time was played out and warped and twisted in so many different ways throughout the whole book. At the very end, when we get the big bombshell, you're kind of like, wow, you can buy into it, and it's pretty intense. That even out in the stars, things with the hegemony aren't as cut as dry as they should be. So let's jump right into it. Bron Lamia. Bron Lamia's story. She's like pretty much Harrison Ford in Blade Runner. I mean that's pretty much it.
Perfect description.
Yeah, this is. I mean, it's Philip K. Dick wrote "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep," and that's what Blade Runner was based off of. And on her world of Lucis, where gravity is heavier, so humans have to actually, lift things that would, be lighter on other worlds. So they get tougher at a young age. It's a pretty tough and hardened society. And she's a private detective in a post-industrial, decaying, rusted city that's crowded, and she works near an industrial park that's run down. And she basically she's old school, trench coat, projectile pistol, none of this laser beam stuff. So it's really cool that we kind of walk in on her, and it's very familiar. And she gets an interesting client that walks in, and this client basically says, "I need your help. I need help with a murder." And she's kind of like, "Well, that's not my jurisdiction." But he entices her, and she eventually says, "Okay, all right, tell me what you got." And he says, "Well, the person that was killed or murdered was me." So I didn't know if I heard it right at first, but I'm thinking what Bron Lamia is thinking. This guy must be crazy. The guy is standing right in front of her and says, "I got killed."
Yeah,
So
he enticed her all right with his good looks and a couple of winks, apparently. Didn't
yeah,
take too long. She kept talking about, "Oh, you're so handsome." I kept looking at him. Oh.
I remember that. I was going to throw that joke in there later because she couldn't help herself. She's like, she's pining over this robot who's so dreamy, and she's like kicking herself, and she's like, okay, stop thinking about his hair and all this garbage. And so that is pretty funny because we get to Braun has been kind of this mystery character till now. So right up front we get all this great characterization, and she's very interesting. You're kind of doubtful with all these other stories. How are you gonna create a new character that we have as much fun with? And we do have a lot of fun with her because basically the story or her client that she takes is a cybrid. A cybrid is an anomaly. It's created by a major character or a major player in this universe, rather. So cybrids are kind of token robots out in society, a few thousand among the entire cosmos. They were created by the Technocore. And we've talked about the Technocore only in passing because they're artificially intelligent machines that are secretly, spirited away. They have a secret location. They became independent from humans a long time ago. So it wasn't like Terminator when machines became conscious and they decided to fight us, and we almost got wiped out. They basically became independent, became our allies, and they're the ones who create the cybrids. And so Johnny is part of a resurrectionist project, and the resurrectionist project is a Technocore, or the AIs, artificially intelligent machines. They're called the Technocore. It's one of their pet projects, and so he's wandering out in the world web, and someone's trying to kill him now. So the Technocore is keeping tabs on him, but he's coming into Braun in secret, and she's really funny. She gets started right. She starts her gumshoe right away, and they forecast out where he got killed. And when he says killed, he lost a week's worth of memories, and he's annoyed with her because when she laughs at that, he's like, "That's eons for a robot." So you can think, robots who are connected, networked to like the whole Technocore, which is like an internet on steroids. You lose a lot of time. So it's another way time keeps popping back up right in front of us. But anyway, they forecast out to a spot which is desolate and empty and completely in the middle of nowhere, and Braun is like, well, can't do nothing here. And then Johnny, which is the robot or the cybrid's name, Johnny drops a bombshell on her. They go back to the bar. She's trying to plug him for information. He's got nothing. He doesn't know who'd want to kill him, and he does say that he was a resurrectionist project, which I didn't actually explain what that was. They resurrect old Earth personalities, famous people that they can actually, composite from historical records, from, journals. But in this guy's case, Johnny is the famous Earth poet. Say it, John.
John Keats. Yeah, and you kind of suspect that when you hear the name Johnny. But there's some
suspect how, why? What? I had no idea.
Of course you didn't, Josh. Only I suspected that. But you get some big reveals very shortly afterward, this just brings everything together for me that Dan Simmons is clearly obsessed with John Keats.
Obsessed.
Clearly a favorite, I think, and King Billy thought the world of Keats, as we learned in the second part of the book that we've already done a podcast on. But yeah, he was resurrected in order to explore. I guess he said that they wanted him to explore a vision that Keats had way back in the 1800s.
Yeah.
And we'll catch up to that in a minute. But yeah, they resurrected his personality specifically, and he's so tied into Hyperion, and the Church of the Shrike wants to talk with him, and someone's after him to murder him, and you're thinking, it's John Keats. What in the world could be so important about this poet that died a long time ago at a very young age?
So we have to say right here that this is one of the threads that is not tied up in the book. John Keats, the 19th century poet, did write a poem called Hyperion, and I think it was unfinished. So all this is based on, the real man. And so because he had a book named Hyperion, or a poem, what's the significance? And that's one of the major plot points in this section of the story. So we have to sit here and put that aside. We have to just kind of swallow that and move on, because it's like, are you serious? I mean, really, are they ever going to answer that question? It's like the Shrike. What's the Shrike? What's this obsession with poets? But we have to swallow that and move on. But basically,
actually, we do get a reveal, and I don't want to bring it up just yet. We do get a reveal as to what the connection actually is, but we'll get to that in a bit.
Well, you have to tell me. I don't think I would have missed. Well, we do get a connection, but we don't get an answer as to what this whole John Keats obsession is. But to solve the murder mystery, Braun Lamy is good at what she does. He reveals who he is. She basically uses her cool spy gadgets to follow him. She does some Total Recall type technology with gadgets, putting on another person's face and switching her wardrobe. He's a pretty boring guy, she finds out. She uses all this illegal tech to follow him through Farcasters. And you talked about world building. You get a sense of how Farcasters just lets you kind of live on one planet, work on another, get entertained on a third planet. So it's just really cool how, this technology which, by the way, was delivered by the Technocore. Humans don't even know how it works, but it's an integral part of their society. So Braun goes to see her friend BB. He's a hacker. BB tells her about cybrids cannot live outside full-time simulation. Why? Because they'd go bat crazy. The whole project failed. They had to live in like a holodeck from Star Trek the whole time. So Johnny is even more of an enigma, that he can actually live in the real web world. What happens then is she goes to the bar where he last remembered being. She gets a bar drunk to actually answer her questions. I mean, come on, this is a whole film noir thing on crime fiction. I mean, where else is she going to get a clue but at a bar, right? And as she finds out that Johnny's missing memory included a conversation there with a guy with a ponytail, with a Templar, which is the tree folk in the robes. As soon as she finds this out, Johnny tries to get kidnapped again, so she flips out. She becomes his bodyguard, and then we get to one of the funnest action scenes in the book. As his bodyguard, she basically lets him go out to be bait, so she'll follow him, and she'll make him bait. And the ponytail guy comes back, and he goes to a tourist site on the Templar homeworld, just forecast right to it. This is that tree world, so we never understand the significance of this society really, but it's a huge tree with tons of Farcasters, and Braun, she's a Lucian, and they're pretty brash, and she grabs the guy that's following Johnny, and she almost gets cut for her trouble because he pulls a knife, runs, and then she realizes he's about to start planet hopping. So we get into this interstellar chase where who knows what world you're going to pop into next. It ends up being sub-frozen Arctic that you can barely survive in for more than a few seconds, and then you jump to another world with floating islands and rickety bridges. So it's a hilarious pursuit, and I love this whole part of the book. Was there any part of this that you found, I guess, Hollywood-worthy, Johnny, or that you found interesting? Because I thought this was the best part of her gumshoeing.
I thought the way the guy she was pursuing ended up was a great part. The fact that you find out that he is a cybrid as well.
Dun 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 dun.
And that he supposedly was supposed to be John Keats' bodyguard, and then that's a whole new mystery she has to solve. But didn't you think at this part of the book Dan Simmons was just way ahead of his time? And the book was written in 1989, and he's already had this concept of things like cybrids having to be constantly plugged in, constantly be online. I mean, that's just like all our devices now, right? Everything has to be online. Even my video games now have to constantly be online. I barely get to play any, but the ones that I do have now that are new, they have to have a constant internet connection because of worrying about piracy and all this stuff, and that's a whole other issue, but everything has to be online all the time, just way ahead of his time. But she catches up with this this guy. He ends up committing suicide pretty much.
He burns up.
He's dissolved right in front of her, just burned up in blue flame.
The blue flame. And you know what? Him being Johnny's bodyguard was a cover story but she doesn't get anything out of him because it's like a self-destruct sequence in essence. You know, they do hand-to-hand combat. I mean, the whole chase was fun because, you know, you got her mental process of like, okay, I'm jumping to this world. Oh, it's colder than cold. He shoots a laser gun at her, and she takes a gambit and takes a calculated risk to go outside the barrier field on this Arctic planet, and she almost gets frozen, and she has to, you know, bust her way back in. Normally, you know, tourists who might, you know, go outside the field can easily get back in, but she's almost frozen, so she's 30 seconds away from freezing to death. She gets back in, and she has all these near misses, and it's just a fun cat and mouse chase. And the very end was fun, where they go hand to hand, and she doesn't want to crush the guy, but he's a fellow Lucian, she thinks, and he gets her pretty good, and she basically has to knock him out, and she's just a really, really tough, you know, independent woman. And so after he self-destructs, the cops are about to get her, and so you talk about how ahead of this time the book was. Well, they go retro on us on this point, and she jumps on the magic carpet.
Why?
It is a magic
carpet. You know, we've been cracking jokes about why is John Keats so important. I know why, because the real John Keats wrote a poem called Hyperion, and also I think The Fall of Hyperion, right? So I get all that. We're cracking jokes, but really, a magic carpet? What made you go there?
Because, man, technology one day it's easier than flying cars. That's why.
No, so, why not a Back to the Future hoverboard? Why? I don't want a flying carpet. Come on, Dan Simmons.
Touche. And she's savvy. She gets hers off the ground. She gets the others so no one can chase her. And she's on this floating island. They're called Motile Isles. And this comes up later in the story because the planet they're on is Maui Covenant, and that's an important world in the last story. But basically, she's flying. She's basically afraid this old retro technology will dump her in the ocean. But then Johnny shows up, you know, in her headset and says, "Hey, there's a forecaster 10 clicks out." She's like, "No, there's not." She's like, "Yeah, it is. It's submerged." And she's like, "How far?" And basically, he takes control of the flying carpet through the internet or technocore and makes a straight dive for the submerged forecaster, and she flips out. So it's a funny relationship building technique. She has to trust him. She has no other choice. He comes to save her. So, you know, there's this relationship building between them, and he takes her. Because it's not safe. The cops ID'd her, so they can't go anywhere. I don't know if this is a continuity gap, but they end up in a replication of old Earth. And so I don't know how Johnny knew about it, how he has access to it, but he does. He's like, you know, an anomaly. He's like the pet of the Technocore. He's allowed to roam free. But they have a replica of old Earth, Johnny, and he goes on to explain that it's part of the Resurrectionist Project. And it was to help, you know, not just have full simulations, but have a real environment, and to help just a few thousand resurrectionist cybrids actually kind of maybe meet their objective. Which again, it was
right. I think that's where he was really meant to be, in his environment where he could continue to flesh out John Keats' personality as though he hadn't died of tuberculosis in the 1800s. I think that was the original intent. But of course, that's, you know, everything's very nefarious here, because why would there be a replica of old Earth, and why doesn't anybody know about it except for the Technocore and Cybrids, apparently? It's kind of odd.
No, you're right. It's a whole planet, one-for-one replica, which is pretty cool. So they have a bonding moment here on old Earth, and then we find out some people who come to attack them. They came the next day, and basically they're in Rome. And Braun, she's pretty hilarious, I'd say.
This is the action scene that I like, because she destroyed these guys. This, to me, was more fun to read than the whole chase and the shooting back and forth. I don't know why, but she destroyed these guys, and I loved it.
Well, this is a rated G podcast, but I'll go ahead and say I love the description. Really, she's like, she was bred. She wasn't bred in combat, but she's like Kassad in the fact that she's naturally talented at it. So she's basically, it's before she's in her birthday suit, basically. When she's fighting these guys, she said, "Hey, once you get over that mental block, you got it. There's really not any big challenges." So these guys, you know, Johnny takes on one when she takes on the other four. But yeah, she crushes them, and they steal the skimmer that these guys were in. They find out they're from the Shrike Church. She's like, "All right, we finally We know another cybrid was trying to kill Johnny. That's disturbing. Robot on robot killing. That might be unprecedented. We don't know. But now the Shrike Church is after him. So she's basically being impulsive again. They steal the skimmer, shoot across the Atlantic, and it's pretty fast apparently. And they land on the Empire State Building and go through a Farcaster right into the hands of the Shrike Church, who are there trying to get away from, or trying to get away from the guys who are going to kidnap them.
Well, and, they purposely walked right into it.
Yeah,
and as I understand, they were both armed pretty well when they came in. So
this is where we get to what we find out what the missing week actually had, the big surprise. You want to tell them about that?
Yeah, so basically they get in there and they actually meet with what was he, the bishop? He's the Pope of the Shrike Church, for lack of, I can't remember what he was called right now. I don't know why that word escapes me. But
bishop or Pope, and it was the Lucis.
This is the head guy, right? This is the head guy, and he tells them that John Keats volunteered to go on the next pilgrimage to Hyperion, which is probably going to be the last one. And then they wanted to make sure he was going to go. They were waiting on an answer from him.
Yeah. So there's your motive right there. There's your motive, and it's funny because you wonder, why is the Technocore? Why is another cyber trying to kill him? So everything finally is coming. Well, next with the big reveal, we find out why they're scared. They find out why he's trying to be killed. So the only thing Johnny really thinks, they need to do something very dangerous to figure out the Technocore's motives. So what do? They go into the Matrix. It's not
more or less.
It's not as bad as the Matrix. We're not like, batteries. Spoiler. Who hasn't seen the Matrix? Never mind. All right, but the Matrix is or the Technocore is off limits to humans, and they get BB, the hacker friend of Bronze, to help them get in. And this thing is beautifully portrayed. This world in cyberspace, because it assaults their senses. There's huge black phages, these defense systems, that are threatening, and huge ecosystems of like cyber fortresses, and they're impenetrable, and it's very scary, and it assaults their senses. They can barely take the sensory, assault on them. So basically, they get the secret, but BB doesn't make it out, and it's pretty graphic. He becomes legend because he's the first human. It's funny how the internet works.
Yeah, he got it. He got the data.
Yeah.
He got the data. He just couldn't escape with his own life. He handed that data off to John Keats.
Yep.
Inside the Matrix, pretty much. But I thought they were in there to get that bit of data, but they were also, and I may have understood this incorrectly, I thought they were trying to grab his personality files as well, because John Keats was trying to become a real human. This was his Pinocchio moment, and he was going to put his actual personality into his actual body instead of having to be plugged into the Technocore the whole time, right? Weren't they also after his personality files?
No, you should just stick a big old sticker on my head that says plot hole. I created that plot hole. That's what they were trying to do. And when he actually disconnected, that would have left the hole, the security hole, which is how they would go in and penetrate the Technocore. So yeah, you're right. He was becoming a real boy, and he actually succeeded. And so they wake up. Braun she got beat up pretty bad, and they wake up in the pits of Lucis, the crime-ridden underworld. And they basically, John says,
where John Keats has dragged her, because she was extremely sick afterwards.
Yeah, she was sick, and he's going to get in trouble in a second, because he makes some decisions on his own, and he didn't ask her. But basically, the big reveal is the fact that the Technocore is more than this benevolent ally that seceded or became independent from humans many years ago and created its own society and to evolve itself. It's actually a splinter of 3 factions. So again, the world is not just thrown at us like, oh, here's the political context. It's all hidden from us. It's hidden from all of human society. So it's very scary, Skelly. It's scary to see this underbelly of the Technocore, because their ambassador to us is the All Thing. What is it? The All Thing.
Right. Which is the Technocore, and this is. And I actually want to discuss a couple of things here, because they...
But go ahead and explain it. Yeah, go ahead and explain the secret.
They have this big project where they're trying to develop the ultimate intelligence, where they can actually predict everything that will happen in the universe. I mean, we're talking everything from maybe a star going supernova to the decisions that the ousters are going to make. They want to predict everything, and they're very close to doing it. But you learn they're very afraid of Hyperion because apparently Hyperion doesn't follow any of the laws of physics. They can't predict Hyperion because it's so...
It's an enigma. They call it
the
unfactorable factor. No, that's not it. Dan Simmons has a beautiful name for it. Yeah, they can't factor it into their equations. They're trying to essentially become God. But that's not the bad thing necessarily. It's the fact that the three factions, one faction wants to kill us. We're irrelevant, and they can live without us. The stable folks want to be our allies. And then the third...
the stables were around before the big mistake. And the volatiles want to do away with us completely. And the ultimates, which is the third faction, they don't care whether we're around or not, as long as whatever decision is made helps their ultimate intelligence project to become reality.
Exactly.
Or to be completed. And at this point in the book, there was a bit of a turning point here, and I got to say I was slightly irritated. Up till this point in the book, well, let me back up. I feel like we got sucker punched with the Technocore. Up till this point in the book, Dan Simmons had talked so heavily about religion, Christianity, even the Church of the Shrike, and you're thinking the whole time there's going to be some religious context or some religious reveal, and there still may be in the next book. However, when you start talking about the Technocore, it's like we make a 90-degree turn. We start going off to the right or the left, whatever way you want to go there. But we start going very far in the other direction from religion. And it seems like the technology stuff is what's actually driving everything here. And that technology is a much bigger player in this mystery of Hyperion, because you learn shortly after that and stop me if I'm getting ahead of myself, but you learn from this that the Shrike may be not a religious symbol at all. The Shrike may be something. The Shrike may be a Terminator, pretty much, right? Either the Technocore built the Shrike and sent it back into the past to kill humanity and get humanity out of its way because we're going to interrupt something for it, or what was left of humanity way into the future built the Shrike in the time tombs and sent it backwards into the past to stop the Technocore. And when I read that part, I said, well, now wait a minute. What was all the point? What was the point of all that religious stuff if really it was all just man versus machines? I mean, he's Arnold, right? The Shrike is Arnold.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth.
I was a little bit confused. However, it could still go back to religion in the next book. There are so many lines crisscrossing in this story. It could go anywhere. But that now seems to be the focus of the story. It's man versus machine and has nothing to do with religion. So I'm a little bit confused here.
Well, I guess if you take it out of the context of these individual pilgrim stories, we did see the Shrike and these followers, the Bakura on the other side of the Flame Force and the priest that visited them. So we saw all that, and you're right, there's a lot of fate implications of faith. But I guess, the Technocore is trying to become God. They're trying to become the ultimate intelligence. So they're trying to factor in everything and be able to be omniscient. So that was what the Shrike was. Maybe he's a result of that, their ability to be omniscient, and maybe that had unintended consequences. So if you think about it, in this broader world of the future, Christianity is dying, and the priest talked about that. So basically, what you said, just to clarify, and you're absolutely right, you took the words right out of my mouth. This is the Terminator. It's the Terminator story. It's stolen from that story part and parcel, because there's two possible things that the Technocore thinks are a possibility. What is the enigma of Hyperion? It's either the Volatiles, the splinter faction of the Technocores, win in the future, and they're just trying to ensure that they win. So they send back the Shrike, and that's their easy way to wipe out the humans, and maybe in a shorter time period. Maybe they think they can evolve faster. I don't know, but you're right. That's one theory. The Shrike is their weapon into the past. And I loved how Dan Simmons said the other theory is a last thrust or a last human fist through time, where the remaining ousters apparently the bad guy, the ousters, actually survive, and the remnants of the hegemony has survived, and they're like the rebels in Star Wars, and they're fighting back, and they send back their own weapon. I'm like, oh man, this is so awesome. So I mean, really, this excited me because this part of the book was such a big revelation that the universe is bigger, and it's not what it seems, because it's not what it seems at all.
Yeah, and there was a point too when Braun Lamia had an audience with CEO Gladstone, and she reveals to Braun Lamia that somebody wants to change the past, and Gladstone didn't really know who, but they wanted to change the past, and the coming war on Hyperion with the ousters and the hegemony was probably a direct result of somebody trying to change the past. So,
yeah, we'll get to the second part of the story, the console, or the end of Hyperion. The console story, actually, with Dan Simmons, I think basically played it out perfectly, because we get this big reveal here, and so the two protagonists, Johnny and Braun, can think their only option. They have nowhere else to go. They armor up into this super RoboCop type gear.
Another great action scene. Love this scene too.
They're going to fight their way to the Shrike Church, because the Shrikes are the only ones who have shown interest in or the Shrike, believers are like, they're the only ones who aren't trying to kill us, essentially.
Right. Well, so the Technocore has people after them now, because the Technocore identified who they were when they were inside stealing that data.
Right. So who knows who's trying to kill them, but basically they have to fight their way there. And
yeah, Josh, we missed something else too, in that when Braun Lamia woke up, John Keats had made a decision to implant something in the back of her head.
Oh right, I told you she'd be mad.
Yeah, it was some kind of little chip. I can't remember what they called it. It was a coil of some sort, but it could hold a large amount of data. And she was very angry. Yeah, she was angry with him that he had basically tapped into her head and put that in her head. She was very angry. But it turns out probably needed to happen.
Probably needed to happen. We do have to get to the second story, which has a whole lot to it. But this action sequence was pretty intense. It was insane, because I'd like to see it made into a movie, because it was a little too complex for me. I was like, wait, how many levels are they climbing? Wait, how much destruction? How many acres of mall were destroyed? And how many camouflaged combatants were coming after them? And Braun was mowing them down and throwing Johnny, make sure he didn't get killed, because they got so close. Pretty much they're in love. We you can't glaze over the love story, but there's some pretty intimate moments. So this person is probably the most important person to her in the world, not only because of the mission, but because she's become attached to him, and basically she doesn't want to see him die. And there's some like minigun, high-wheeled projectile sniping, just huge action. I'm like, holy cow, this is insane. It is like a Terminator sequence where it's like mano a mano, except it's these two versus a battalion or a company-sized element.
What it felt like.
And but in the end, realistically, it could have gone campy. In the end, they probably wouldn't survive. We know Johnny didn't survive. He's not on Hyperion with us. So what's the outcome of this battle sequence? Oh, we got all better. No, he actually does die in her arms. And before that, he taps the back of her implant on the head, and he pretty much gives her his consciousness. He got the gift of having his own consciousness into his cyber body, and she passes that on to him. And I can't wait to see how that plays out in the future, because it's her soulmate inside of her now. But she's only a carrier, and we can't get all too mushy-gushy here, because they explain that she's just a carrier of the data. So unless there's some symbiotic release of personality later on, it's really not that big emotional weight of two personalities in her. She still has her honey alive. It's nothing like that.
Well, it's kind of the other big reveal here about the importance of John Keats is that, and I think I don't remember when this was stated, but we have to say it now that we're here at the end of Braun Lamia's story, is that they believe the original John Keats had some kind of transcendental vision or communication with the current John Keats, that basically this hybrid. They think he had some kind of transcendental vision or communication, and that's what inspired him to write the Hyperion poem, which was never finished. But regardless, that seems to be the importance. Now,
I totally forgot that, John.
We still don't really know what the importance of it is completely.
But you make me feel a lot better. I'm certainly glad you brought that up. That might have been exactly one mention in the book that I missed and didn't see the significance of. But you make me feel a lot better about maybe this whole book, about maybe this here. And here's my thinking. This is not conspiracy. This is the Resurrectionist Project. Complete failure. Maybe Keats was the only personality that wasn't a failure. Maybe all the Resurrectionist projects had some tie to the past, because we're a bunch of time travelers. Come on. I mean, this whole thing, essentially, it might be veiled in shadows, but there's time travel technology, and somebody has it. So maybe the Technocore understands that, and you just maybe realize they were experimenting and they can't control it, but Keats was one of the successes of that. And that makes me feel better as far as the connection of this whole literary figure that's a complete mystery and seemingly arbitrary, like John Keats. Who cares? But that makes sense. That's cool. That's
right.
Cool.
And the Technocore is very afraid of Hyperion, but Keats seems very tied to Hyperion, which explains, I guess, why they wanted to kill him. But I can understand why they would have a motive to kill him. We don't know yet what the real reason was or what the real tie is yet. So we wait until we read further into the other book.
So here it is. We come to it at last, the end of the Pilgrim's journey. This is where we don't have a lot of answers. They've gotten to the physical end of the planet, the northern bridle range. The tram car.
Braun Lamy is pregnant.
Braun Lamy is pregnant. What?
Yeah.
What? You're right. You're right.
Totally pregnant.
Sorry, I'm looking at the clock. I'm like, holy cow!
John Keats will be reborn as a real human. She's got his consciousness, Josh.
Well, we talked a little bit earlier. Yeah, there's one theory, but we know the creepy chant that the Shrike acolytes and believers were chanting when she made it to the Shrike church, and he died, and she actually got passage on the ship.
The mother of their atonement. We're back to religion again. Yes.
But it's the mother of the atonement. Who's the atonement, or who's going to deliver that? The Shrike. So that's just creepy. It's like, that's creepy. I'd be scared. I made that connection with the creepy chant, and she remembers it later. Sorry, Braun's pregnant. Ugh, golly. Okay, end of Braun's story. On to the console story. So at the end of the tram car, they go to Kronos Keep. Kronos Keep was a big destination carved right into the edge of the mountain. It's abandoned. There was some pretty bad things happened there. No one survived. Sure, the Shrike went rampant in Kronos Keep. But John, this is where they're on their last leg, and war finally breaks out, and that's kind of the trigger for the console to say, finally decide, I will tell my story, which he had no intention of doing. But there's international or interstellar war above them in the sky, and we come to find out. I don't want to reveal anything, but that's just a trigger. Let's say that's a trigger for him to say, fine, I'll tell my story. So he tells his story just like Lenar Hoyt in the very beginning, the priest. He first tells the story of another person and before starting his own story. And that kind of, I think we're all channeling Martin Salinas here, because Martin Salinas says it for us. He's like, oh, come on, can no one tell a straight story? Because we're near the end of the book. And it's like,
they keep telling him to shut up. They're like, shut up, and they keep pointing guns at him. I'm like, why do you guys hate Salinas so much? I mean, he really hasn't done anything that bad. They're all going, I hate you. Sit down, little man. He's talking the truth.
Yeah. He's telling the truth. He's saying he's like the reader. He's just saying what we would say. But we get to the console story, which I've been anticipating highly. And I told you earlier, I didn't have vertigo during this part of the story, even though it jumps through time constantly, and it jumps flashback, flash forward, like in real time, real quick, and I'm like, whoa, 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 but it makes sense. And we start at a gravesite of a woman named Siri. Now this was a 1989 novel, so Siri was, Dan Simmons probably has a trademark on that name. It was before Apple got it as your personal helper, your personal assistant. Siri was actually a resident of Maui Covenant, which was the island with the floating islands that we saw earlier with the magic carpets. And this is a significant world because, again, it was hinted at earlier. But Siri there was a rebellion on this planet. It was crushed. There was floating islands, which were pulled kind of like horses and carriages. It was pulled by dolphins because these group of humans ages ago wanted to save Earth's biology, marine biology, and so the dolphins were maybe one of the few successful transplants to that planet. So there's important context here, and thank goodness I had the ebook. I went back and said, oh my goodness, we're ending the book on a planet that's been seen and been in some of the scenery, in some of the sequences, and referred to in other parts of the book. So I'm getting really excited here because we're about to find out what's the deal, and it does wrap up, I think, satisfactorily. I'll go ahead and say this is very satisfactory. But Siri is dead, and the space sailor, I forget his name. Marin, thank you. He was her lover. He's still young, and so we see that he was a space sailor building a Farcaster above Maui Covenant. And so the whole story is in the context of him being one of the hegemony. And on Maui Covenant, there's a faction, the Separatists, who don't want to be part of the hegemony. And you kind of see how you have to soften up a world, get its economy ready, get its population ready, make sure that they're going to be a productive citizen of the hegemony before they join. And so that whole context shows you what? Humans might want to have their own destiny outside this one interstellar superpower. And I'm not getting ahead here because this is kind of like their love relationship is so real, but she ages so fast, and he comes back only at 6 times in her lifetime. So you think it's far-fetched, but they have this immediate connection because, John, you're the literary guy. How do they originally meet? It's kind of a Shakespearean meeting of sorts.
You know what? That escapes me right now. I just remember they met when they were very young. Well, this part of the book was so. Like I said earlier, Dan.
Did you get vertigo?
No, he was still setting the scene. I mean, we were still learning about the universe, and here we are at the very end. And
he gives you a ton more to take in, right?
No, but it was great. But we really explored that concept of what the time debt really was, right? Because technically, Marin is just as old as Siri is. Right. But because he's done so much interstellar travel, she's aging and he's not because he's been in cryosleep and all that good stuff. And I love that part. Dan Simmons, we're still learning about everything. This isn't the end of the story.
This isn't
plot driven.
Well, and he throws what I consider the most intense love story in this book. There's several love stories.
It was very touching. This was a good one.
It was. There was Kassad's love story. There was Braun's love story. In a physical sense of finding someone close and that soulmate. And basically they meet at a festival. They're not supposed to go to the indigenous population because the world's not a hegemony world. And they get the flying carpet. It's cool. The flying carpet comes back. And they go to this week-long festival. And it's this beautiful, I think First Line is the name of the city. I can't remember, but it's this harbor city on one of the floating islands. And it's just beautiful because it's this big festival. But Johnny's friend, not Johnny, Marin's friend, is another sailor. And we find out how violent the opposition is on the planet because they find out they're sailors. And his friend is actually drunk and reciting poetry or whatever. It's just like a Shakespearean festival, and this guy challenges him to a good old-fashioned duel. And Marin's friend gets a laser pen and tries to stop it then and there. It's an actual laser pointer that can do damage, and basically,
I want one.
Marin tries to intervene, and he gets his friend killed because the other guy sticks him. And it's funny because his friend says, "A plague on both your houses." So that kind of immediately triggered, oh, this is like Romeo and Juliet. I get it. He had to kind of he had to kind of actually say that, put it in my face, because I was too thick to get that otherwise. But some of the highlights of the story, John, well, I can't jump from there. His friend dies. You'd think there'd be huge consequences. But again, with the time debt to travel, after he leaves, and they have a mini tribunal, and he's slapped on the wrist. 11 years passes before he sees her again, and it's become kind of a legend And I didn't really assimilate why it would be a legend because I know the end result of what happens, but their relationship, actually I do get it. Their relationship probably sparked, I don't know what it means, John.
Well, this whole scene here, I wasn't even paying attention to the Shakespearean stuff. Oddly enough, I mean, I got it.
Both your houses.
I got it, but it was not in the forefront of my mind. And what I really noticed was, I kind of thought Dan Simmons was showing really the corruption of the hegemony. That it's going to come in, it's going to take the resources, it's going to stamp out all the natural beauty of the world. Not that it won't still be beautiful, but it's going to turn it into a tourist attraction. And the series people, at least the Separatists, did not want that. And there was a scene where Marin was with basically old Siri when she was 70, and they were in a boat together, and she started asking. They laid down in bed together, and she started asking him very specific questions, and you knew exactly where she was going with it. And it was really, it was kind of heartbreaking because you knew what was coming next. And,
yeah, you're right. You're right.
He was just answering the questions, and you just knew what was coming. And they had loved each other for so long, and you just knew what was going to happen.
Basically, the hegemony was going to take their planet and turn it into what they wanted to, regardless of what they wanted. They basically got somebody to sign off on it. The whole planet wasn't on board. But you're right. This part of the book was about the corruption of the hegemony, and we didn't know that. I guess this, in a very 21st century kind of context that we can relate to, is they're raping the planet. They're going to sit here and go and talk to developers, get the islands. They're going to sit here and put oil platforms because it's like they don't use oil. It's hilarious. Again, he said, hey, we don't use oil for gas, but no society can get past petroleum, because she was joking. It's like, why do you still use petroleum? It's for plastic because 10 billion people use a lot of plastic. But they're going to basically do what they want to with the planet. But John, you're right, and I'm glad you mentioned it. They talk about this, but again through the character's eyes, and they make you care. One of the best scenes. They only have 6 rendezvous throughout her lifetime, but it's this long distance love story that you believe. And the scene that makes me believe it is when they're under one of these floating islands. They basically have a very a night long together, and then the next morning they're like, let's keep going, let's go scuba diving, and they try to talk to the dolphins. And so it's this underwater island, the underside with long vines, feeding vines that eat on the plankton, and you have dolphins, and they're talking to them with like a necklace. And it's not too far-fetched. It's not too far-fetched trying to talk to animals. I work with a guy who's doing a dolphin project, trying to talk to animals, so to speak. And this scene is just it's like Blue Lagoon. It's like where they actually commune with nature. And it was real to me, and it showed what they had on this world. And that's, again, why I actually cared if some developer was going to move in and destroy it. And so you're getting, there's a lot in this story, but you hit it on the head with what their relationship revolves around. They come from 2 different worlds, the whole Romeo and Juliet. And at the end of his life, they're about to join the hegemony. The forecaster is about to be open. And he goes to her tomb to pay his last respects. And throughout the story, he asks her once or twice, am I doing the right thing? So you talking about the boat scene, saying, here's what's going to happen to our world. And they've had conversations that we don't see how she wants maybe him to help her stop it. I don't know if she ever explicitly asked for his help, but when he's in the tomb with her, or in the tomb paying his respects, there's a hologram of her. And it's for him. And she said there's nothing that needs to be said. And we've talked this out. I can't convince you anymore. But he's wrestling with a decision, and we find out that this is something that they have to reconcile. They're from 2 different worlds. Which world will win out? And what does he decide to do, John? This was really subtle right here.
He plants a bomb on the Farcaster, and at the opening day, I guess, the ribbon cutting, it blows up.
Yes,
and then he joins the rebellion.
On his magic carpet. He's like, ha ha ha. Because the magic carpet from 70 years ago, she kept, and it was in her tomb. These things must have a lot of mileage on them, man. I mean, they got good warranties. It was awesome.
It's a hawking mat.
It was awesome. It wasn't it. He's like, ha ha, catch me if you can, suckers, and he goes off to join the rebellion. It kind of floored me because it was like, whoa. I mean, it really was like this whoa moment. This guy made a big decision. He could have been rich. He could have been immortal. He talked about how he was immortal. He was long-lived. He was like a god. He had committed. This was his life, but this woman changed him. Even though in real time, he only experienced a couple months with her. So it's pretty poignant of what their relationship means, and I just have to convey that. But we find out the Maui Covenant rebellion doesn't last. They are crushed. The hegemony only takes 5 years to get to them because they...
instead of 10, yeah. They went pretty quick.
There's some reason there. They might have already started building a fleet, which actually shows how insidious they are as a society, and we're about to get the big reveal right here. But they crushed the revolution, and it's pretty painful. Marin actually dies. We think that the consul is Marin. At the end of the story, they're like, "Are you Marin?" He's like, "Nope." And we're like, "Really? I mean, really?
Come on, guy. What do you mean? No.
Who are you? Who are you?" So basically,
the grandson.
He's the grandson.
He's the grandson.
He sees his planet raised in a in hellstorm and fire, and the dolphins murdered because they're putting down the separatists. And we saw how the hegemony responded during the Ouster attack on that other planet. But we end their story there. We end Marin's story and Ciri's story, and the consul says, "I was the grandson. And I have waited."
And dun dun dun. I'm the Ouster spy.
Kind of, really. It's too complicated.
Kind of, sorta. He's like a triple. He's a triple agent.
He's a triple, quadruple, quintet agent.
Super secret squirrel agent man.
So he has waited, John. He is waiting for his day of vengeance. He enlisted in the civil servant corps for the hegemony, but basically he has gone through the ranks, and he's lived in the outback, and he's learned how to become one of the hegemony. Their world did get kind of folded in. It became a tourist society. He saw the dolphins die, and it's not just the dolphins; it's his whole world. So he's held on to that, and it gets interesting because he talks about how he let that same thing happen to other worlds. He let it happen to Hyperion. Again, all these worlds we've seen before with Sol Weintraub. He lived on this Hebrew world to kind of get away. But New Jerusalem had a Farcaster, and it kind of was, they predicted, will eventually ruin that society with all these people coming in. So they didn't get hung up on certain things. But this is the big reveal right here. As a civil servant of the hegemony, he found out that this is not like the United Federation of Planets, which is the ambivalent, big government in Star Trek, where you actually
government.
Say again.
We're all working together for the better of mankind and stuff.
An alien kind, and they actually wait for worlds to be ready, and then they make first contact. The whole point is that the hegemony is the antithesis, the exact opposite of the Federation. They sit here, and any sentient being that poses a potential threat, they will eradicate. They will destroy and obliterate to extinction. And the console has been part of this, basically genocide. We don't ever get it. I don't get a sense of if they actually had, like intelligent people that could talk one-to-one with humans. But the Technocore, this is where it gets worse. The Technocore actually helped the original humans. So we get that we're trying to protect our own, but basically we're expanding across the universe by killing other possible sentient beings, not even trying to sit here and see what we can learn from them. Because why? We have the Technocore. They're helping us, or so we think. We don't even, outside the government, people don't know that there are some Technocore factions that will kill us outright, and they can, because our entire society depends on it. But the damning thing that actually seals the nail in, I guess, our coffin and says that maybe we don't deserve a second chance, John, is the fact that the hegemony or the government leaders, before the Hygira, before the Exodus from Earth, actually co-conspired with the first artificial intelligent machines to actually destroy Earth. The big accident was no big accident. They just saw a bigger piece of the pie, and they had a bigger plan. The artificial intelligent machines said, hey, we got the technology, whatever, there's more out there. We don't need Earth. So you may think that's a far-fetched to destroy the cradle of life, but that's what the government leaders and the greedy people generations before did, and that floored me. It floored me that we intentionally killed Earth to go out, and we didn't even know that artificial intelligent machines were already planning to cut us loose at some point, but we co-conspire with them to kill God's green Earth. And
well, they needed everyone to colonize and branch out so that basically the Technocore could accomplish its ultimate objective, which was the ultimate intelligence. But the console learned all this detail from being basically an ambassador or a consul to the Ousters, because the Ousters are next on the hegemony's list of intelligent beings that pose a threat to them. And we find out that the battle that's coming on Hyperion is not the Shrike drawing everybody there, which we thought in the first podcast for this book, episode 7, that's what was going on. This has actually all been planned. Just like the battle on Brescia had been planned, they actually teased the Ousters into coming to Brescia. It wasn't just a random invasion by the Ousters. And they have decided that it gets so nefarious. The reason for this bloodbath that's about to happen on Hyperion has nothing to do really with even wiping out the Ousters. The hegemony is trying to manipulate the Technocore into allowing Hyperion to become part of the world web. Because right now the Technocore is so scared of Hyperion, they don't want a Farcaster there necessarily. But if you threaten Hyperion, which is something the Technocore wants to study and something they're also afraid of, you threaten it by being taken over by Ousters, and then the hegemony has to go fight. It forces them to put a Farcaster there. It forces the Technocore to accept them into the world web, and that was the real reason behind everything. And the console learned all this during his time with the Ousters. He shared his secrets with them about how he hated the hegemony, and they shared their secrets with him. And so while they're on Hyperion, the pilgrimage, while they're on Hyperion, he's been communicating with the Ousters. He's been reporting on the pilgrimage's progress the whole time. But you know what? He's also been doing work for the hegemony. and ultimately, the biggest reveal of the whole book is that the Ousters have a device that can destroy the time tides, the anti-entropic fields around the time tombs, and they brought it to the console. He murdered the Ousters that brought it to him, and now he has the device, or actually he's already set it in motion, and those time tides are already being eaten away at. And it was going to take about a year before they completely collapsed.
It's like a high-stakes poker game, and you explained it very well. There's a lot of players, and the humans they know in the high levels of government that the robots could kill them at any time. Their only card to play is to figure out Hyperion as maybe a weapon to help them, or the Shrike or the Time Tombs, the secret to it. So you're right. These high stakes it's all manipulation with individual little covert organizations within each of these three big groups: the Ousters, the Technocore, and the hegemony. So the console is a free agent. He's essentially like none of them are the salvation or even the worth saving, I guess. The salvation of man or worth saving, because everything you just said, the Ousters, not necessarily bad guys, but what would they do? They'll release the Shrike and the Gambit to try to get a foot into the universe, because they're kind of an outlier maybe, but they're pretty impressive foe to go up against.
Well, there's something in those tombs. Everyone that's been in there can't find anything, but even Gladstone told Braun Lamia during there's something in there, and when the time tides are destroyed and the tombs open, something is in there that will be revealed, and the Shrike will be completely released at that point. There will be nothing tying him down to those time tombs anymore, and that's already been set in motion.
And you know what? The console set it in motion when he actually betrayed the Ousters. He basically set it in motion ahead of the timetable. I forget how the engineer said it, but they had to have control of. They had to be winning the war. The Ousters had to be winning the war before they released the strike or started it. I can't remember what it was, but basically he started the device on his own timetable to throw off any planning the Ousters might have.
And the hegemony too. He threw off everybody's plan.
He did, and everybody on the pilgrimage, when he finishes this story, are looking at him, and Selenis is like, "What do they do with traitors? They hang them." And Kassad, but Braun Lamy has a different reaction. She goes and hugs him, because this is such a, kind of like this man is lost, and they're all lost, and they're not safe because that part of the planet will be nuked any minute because the time tombs are the threat. So that's it. The Shrike is coming. We don't get resolution there. We don't get to see them meet the Shrike. So you could sit here and say, what a ripoff. I told you earlier, maybe it's a Lord of the Rings journey. It's a space saga. You said it's one of the best reads you've ever read, and I absolutely agree with you, which is why this is the first part of the story that was necessary, that made us see this incredible world that has a lot at stake. Humanity is at stake. We've sat here and set ourselves up for our potential own destruction, and isn't that one of the biggest themes? How our self-destructive behavior, and this is just set out on a grand scale. So I'm absolutely loving, regardless of what direction Simmons goes in, I'm loving every single bit of it, just for that fact that it deals with the human condition, and our own salvation, our own destruction is in our hands, John. Right?
Yep, and the actual book ends with a Full Metal Jacket ending, where they're all marching off towards the time tombs, and they're singing M-I-C-K-E-Y. No, they're singing, sorry everyone, they're singing The Wizard of Oz. They're off to see the wizard.
You were close. That was pretty funny. And just to give context here, it's not corny because Sol Weintraub, the professor, is singing to his daughter, and they're all scared witless. And Braun Lamy starts holding hands, and she needs some reassurance, and everybody's thinking we might be dead in a few minutes. So yeah, it's a pretty fun, lighthearted ending, and you're kind of like, okay, we know who's going to see the Shrike. We know who these people are. But the payoff, baby. I want to see if after Luke Skywalker finds out that Darth Vader's his father, what's going to happen?
Well, and we have to find out if Het Mastine is actually alive. They think they saw him walking around, going towards the time tombs. They weren't sure it was him. It looked like him. So that whole mystery of was he dead? Who killed him? Maybe he's not dead. We still have to flesh that out too.
I just want to see his face. I mean, come on, man. All cloak and dagger type stuff. So that's it. That is Hyperion. We have done our best to do a gigantic spoiler cast with every detail, with every juicy bit of relevant information that makes this thing a Hugo Award-winning novel, which we didn't award it that honor, but it is.
I would have though.
It's well deserving of it. The sequel is nominated for a Hugo and Nebula Award, I believe. So we'll be reading that shortly, but not now. We're going to take a break. John, tell us what we're reading next.
Yeah, look, we're going to take a one-episode break before we pick up The Fall of Hyperion, which is the second book, because with this kind of ending, we have got to find out what the Shrike is. This has been so good, and I hope all the other readers and listeners have been enjoying it as much as we have. Really, this has been just one of the best books I've ever read. I bet the next one's going to be just as good. So like I said, a one-episode break, and we are going to cover some H.G. Wells. Too close
Classic.
to the camera. All right. Hey, we have two very, very short stories that we want to cover. The Flowering of the Strange Orchid and In the Abyss. We're going to cover those two stories for the next podcast. And what we wanted to do is, since H.G. Wells is one of the original sci-fi writers, we wanted to kind of talk about him a little bit, talk about the mindset during the time period he wrote these stories. Let's discuss some original science fiction, like the original stuff. And let's kind of talk about that. So just two, they're actually really short. Any of the readers could probably get through those stories in maybe a day or two tops, I think. But we'll have a lot of room for discussion of some original sci-fi.
That's going to be awesome. We had a friend, part of our Rain Books group on Goodreads, who actually read War of the Worlds, and she didn't know how it ended. So I thought the ending of that, which I do know, which I won't reveal, was pretty darn ingenious. The War of the Worlds. She said it was a little too subdued for her 21st century high-octane action sci-fi kind of a concept, but hey, the originals, that's where it all comes from. So, Johnny, I've had a blast, man. Thanks a lot. Thank you, everybody, for watching or listening to the Reign of Books podcast. We'll catch you next week with H.G. Wells. See you, man.
Have a great weekend.